We got Bill Bender here from Sporting News. Bill, it's good to see you. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We do appreciate you making it. Know that you've got a busy, packed schedule, as I guess everyone in college football suddenly does, coming out of media days and then right into fall camp. Everybody hits the field this week, but it's still too early to really gather any intel from what's happened on the field. Most of the teams are still not even in pads. But that said, as you scan training camp over the next 3 or 4 weeks, aside from game-changing, team-changing type injuries, which of course we don't want to see, but it's inevitable. What storylines and what information are you trying to gather that's going to shape your outlook and maybe your predictions on this season?
Well, you start at the top with Ohio State, the quarterback battle there, where Will Howard and Devin Brown are going at it. Yeah, I think Will Howard will eventually win that starting job, but that's one. I mean, they've got every other piece. We just don't know 100% who the quarterback is, even though I think it's Will Howard. And then with Robert Thomas in Georgia, that was obviously a storyline, and I think a much needed statement by Kirby Smart and with Georgia letting Rara go after this rash of offseason arrests they've had.
Hey, Bill, that's a great point with Georgia in particular. Let's settle down right at this spot because it's just odd what has transpired there. So this is not simply, okay, this program's off the rails, it's run amok, guys are doing all sorts of crazy things. Aside from the Rara Thomas story, in which there was more to his situation than just a traffic violation or reckless driving, there was unfortunately family violence there, or at least those allegations. But with all the rest of these, they seem to be isolated to driving. It is so strange. We're talking about 24 incidents inside of 2 years for one football program.
Right. And like you said, most of them are driving. You hear one or two from a program. Player caught speeding, a player driving under the influence. Unfortunately, that does happen. This is a rash. And I don't, it's hard for me to say behind closed doors how that's really going to impact this team, other than Kirby needing to, you can go on a podium and we can listen to it and they can talk about a culture of accountability and all those things that they talk about at media days. But you just kind of roll your eyes when you see one after another and nobody get penalized. And they talked about how part of it is the NIL collectives. They're going to start finding them there. To me, it's always playing time. You take away a kid's playing time, his film, his shot for the next level, that's the best way to get your point through.
Getting back to the Big Ten, there are some teams on the periphery. Of course, Michigan or Ohio State and Oregon, according to the odds makers, are given that favorite status. Michigan's the defending champion. Penn State, USC, Iowa, they seem to be on the fringe. Who do you think has a real shot of possibly breaking into the elite, and why out of those three? Or maybe somebody else that you like?
Well, Iowa and Penn State have friendly schedules in two different directions. Iowa has to go to Ohio State. Penn State gets Ohio State at home. I think USC is a very interesting team in Indianapolis. I was not taken aback, I don't know even what the word is, like pleasantly surprised at the candor of Lincoln Riley. I mean, you and I have been at that event and you know how buttoned up most Big Ten coaches are. But the candor from him and Dan Lanning was, oh, here's a coach actually saying what he feels and not afraid to, go at the media a little bit. That said, I still think we'll have to see what their defense looks like. So of those options presented that could join Ohio State, Michigan, Oregon in that Big Ten race, I think it's Penn State. Penn State was picked third by the media. I would pick them fourth. I would still have Michigan ahead of them. I know Michigan's schedule's tougher. It's one of those trust. I just trust Michigan a little bit more, even with all those changes, than I do Penn State.
Bill Bender's here from Sporting News. Check out Bill's work. You see his X handle right there. And then, of course, sportingnews.com, which has been a staple in the industry forever. And when you talk about Penn State, it's interesting because, Bill, of course, we know that based on the college football playoff rankings, that they would have been a playoff team 6 times out of 10 years as a 12 team. They benefit the most of anybody in college football. If history repeats itself, Notre Dame would probably be right there as well. So I would think that they could produce the same season this year. And let's say they lose the first round playoff. Now, there'll be some people that will be critical and point out they didn't do anything different. The format changed. It's the same James Franklin and the same Penn State. They went 10-2 and then lost a playoff game. But I think that would appease their fans for maybe a season or two before they would start to grumble and say, hey, now let's do something in the playoff.
Oh, I agree. Good news for Penn State. Drew Aller's back. 25 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Didn't play well in the big games. This is not breaking news by any stretch. Everybody saw the Michigan, Ohio State, Ole Miss struggles, but another year under center. A little more help at receiver. Good news, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen back. They combined for 14 rushing touchdowns last year. The defense will be good. I think you bring up an interesting point because, and I don't know if I talked to you about this last time I was on your show, but the theory for me in some ways is a playoff appearance akin to a Sweet 16 appearance in basketball now, where, okay, he made the Sweet 16. He's cool. You know, we're not gonna fire this coach now. And I don't know that Penn State has another answer should they move away from James Franklin. You look at the track record, it's pretty good. It's just Ohio State's a little bit better, and Michigan is a little bit better in those battles that they've had. No Michigan on the schedule's huge. I will say if anybody has the most pressure to be on the playoff, it's probably them or Ole Miss.
Absolutely. Jackson, thank you so much for dropping Bill's links, Instagram, X, all of them are right there for everyone to go directly from our conversation to follow Bill on those various platforms. So Jackson, thank you so much for doing that. And what's interesting about Penn State as well is it was just listening to James Franklin address the media at Big Ten Media Days. I was hearkened back to the comment that is now going on 6 years ago, in which he said after another Ohio State excruciating loss, he called his program great. I took a little exception to that, but we all have different terms. But he was basically saying we're really good. They're elite, pointing to their locker room and saying we need to get there. And that seemed like this big statement to say, almost read between the lines, we are going to get there. But now we're going on 6 years, and Penn State's pretty much still sitting in the same spot.
Well, right. And I've been to those big ones. The Saquon Barkley year at the Shoe, they had Ohio State beat. And then JT Barrett rallied Ohio State to a victory there. When they played in a whiteout, I had a very different story written with 8:09 remaining. And then, Ben Victor catches a long pass. And at the end of that game, I think Chase Young stopped Trace McSorley. You could hear a pin drop. Last year, big buildup, and sitting there, he repeated the same speech you just said. I believe the phrasing was something to the effect of one of the top 3 defenses in the nation. Well, Ohio State and Michigan were just a little bit better on defense too, right? And some would say Penn State was a little bit better than Ohio State. I would push back on that. But when you have those elite defenses, Michigan was just a little bit better. I think that perception-wise, the one that hit the most last year was Michigan beating them in their house, coming off the Harbaugh suspension, not throwing the ball. Like, that was trolling. Is that my kids tell me that's the word, trolling. They were trolling Penn State openly in the second half in that game. So, yeah, but I still think he's done a very good job there. Winning 10 games, there's nothing wrong with that. They're getting better. They're a lot better at not losing games they shouldn't lose. They've had a couple exceptions, the Illinois 20 overtime game. But I like the program. I like how they develop players. I like how they recruit. They need to find a couple receivers, I think. That's the big one for them. That was the difference between them and the Buckeyes last year.
Bill Bender breaking down Big Ten football, college football, sporting news is where you can find him. You see all the particulars down on the screen. In fact, Bill, of course, Ryan Day could be put in the same category as James Franklin, just at a higher level, meaning this is what you're expected to do. You're falling short. What are you going to tell us about it? I go back to when Ryan Day hit the podium at Big Ten Media Days. It was just a couple hours following an appearance on ESPN, one of their morning shows. And then Paul Feinbaum responded to that comment to basically say, "What's Ryan Day done? He needs to beat Michigan." Da, 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 da. And I thought the question or the response was supposed to be that Paul Feinbaum was responding to what Ryan Day had to say, not his track record of like he can't do anything about that.
Right.
All he can say is all the right things, which to me is it's unacceptable. We know who we are. We know what the expectations are. We're working to correct it.
Yeah, he can't beat Michigan on August 2nd. That's a great point. They can't. I thought being around Ryan Day in Indy that he was loose for all this talk about pressure and the illogical nature of this pressure that I was talking to somebody last night. I was like, so in high school, I won't go too far off the track here. In high school, I really struggled once I got to like the second algebra class. And I think this 12-team college football playoff in terms of pressure and hot seats is you have to teach the math on this in terms of, okay, Ohio State gets to the semifinals or second round and loses, but they beat Michigan. I think he's fine. I really do, even though that deck is really loaded. If they lose to Michigan, get to the national title game, I don't know. I don't know how they'll feel in Columbus, but I'm pretty sure they're not going to fire him. So I think the Michigan game's the first priority, but they can't do that now. And I think he was loose because he's got a loaded deck. 11 guys that could have gone to the NFL draft come back. On top of this, transfer portal ads like Caleb Downs, Quinn Shad, Will Howard, they're loaded. So, and they're not going to be tested till they play Iowa. So I think that's why and he was talking today in his availability about how long the season's going to be. Who manages that, right? Like who manages playing all these games? And I think Ohio State's built to do all of those things.
Bill, I would have named Iowa to be their first test as well. A lot of people wouldn't. They're going to be like a 25-point favorite in that game. That seems ridiculous, but I remember the Iowa game 2 years ago, and we do an Iowa show with our buddy Corey Bratta, and I told him during the offseason, and I underestimated it because we were talking about the Iowa matchup, and they were coming off a 10-2 season, and I said, Ohio State's going to be like a 22-point favorite, and he was like, "No, that's crazy. There's no way." They turned out to be a 30-point favorite in that game, and they covered the spread. I still think that that's a tricky spot. Iowa, if they can figure out some offense, and of course they hired Tim Lester to do just that. It could be a difficult play for the Buckeyes there in October.
Yeah, and first real defense they're going to play. I remember that game you referenced. Iowa, strangely, there was a story written after about how they would have been better off punting. Their offense was terrible. Their defense still played well. They made C.J. Stroud uncomfortable. Ohio State had trouble driving the field. And when I say tough game, it's going to be a physical game, and it's the week before Oregon, so it's a test there. And then a little bit later, they play Nebraska, who we can talk about a little bit if you like. An improved Nebraska team the week before Penn State. So these couple minor potholes. Tim May pointed that out to me, the great Tim May, Ohio State writer. And the more I think about it, those are not trap games, but just kind of, you better realize that there's a pothole there and you better get, step around it, do what you need to do to get through it.
Yeah, a lot of people misinterpret my predictions, and I take a lot of criticism for it because I just don't select, okay, well, the obvious Ohio State loss is at Oregon. That probably will be the one. But if you look at the results at the end of the season, I say this all the time, Bill. If you track top 25 games, there's about 20 to 23 per week because sometimes, obviously, they play each other. You can count on this like clockwork. 4 or 5 of those games will be upsets. Right. So they're not always the games that are supposed to be the upsets or the losses that you can peg. And so, it's often the Iowa game and not the Oregon game that turns out to be the trip up. But of course, that's not going to much matter in this new playoff format. We got Bill Bender from Sporting News breaking down the Big Ten for us. We'll go to Nebraska since you brought him up. Of course, everyone there in Huskerland is excited about finally getting back to a bowl game. I throw this one at people from time to time, and they can't believe it, that Nebraska has the longest bowl drought of any team in the nation, not Vanderbilt, not Rutgers, not whomever else you would think, but it's Matt Rule now. And even though this team and this program seemed so different last year, and listening to a very confident, very conversational head coach who had a winning track record in Matt Rule, they look like the same team in the fourth quarter every week that would blow the game. Now we'll see what happens this year, but what are your thoughts about the Huskers?
7 straight losing seasons is mind-blowing. And for somebody like me that grew up and it was like an event when they lost in the 90s, especially from 94 to 97. I know where I was when Arizona State beat them. Like, that was a landmark upset. So
shut them out.
Yeah. Actually, a guy I played high school football with was on that Arizona State team. So that's the biggest reason I know that. But as far as Matt Rule, he knows how to win the press conference. He's brilliant in that environment. Big Ten Media Day, I always think he's the biggest winner. He's great on the podium. He's personable. He's funny. Right combination of humor. One thing that stuck out with me is he knows, and I'm a numbers nerd too. He was like, we have 37 defenses. Oregon was 12-2. He knows his numbers, which is great. I think they're going to go to a bowl game this year. I think they're going to get off to a fast start. The sense I got is they are itching to get Colorado in their stadium. That they were not happy about how last year went, and they're ready for that one. Their fan base is ready for that one. And I think Raiola is the X factor. Anytime you have a 5-star quarterback freshman, it's hard to hold down the hype. Matt tried. He won't go on and on about Dylan Raiola, but that's why Peyton Manning was so big at Tennessee, or Terrell Pryor at Ohio State. When you get a guy like that, he's going to play. So how quickly he picks things up, I think they're a very interesting team, and can't wait to see what they do and where they will be. I think 6 or 7 games in, when they go to Ohio State, do they actually compete in that game? Because to me, every Big Ten school, fair or unfair, I measure them against Ohio State still. Even with Michigan, I still measure Michigan up against how you do against that loaded Ohio State roster. And obviously the last 3 years, they've taken care of that.
And Nebraska's played well at times against Ohio State. Of course, they did at home against that C.J. Stroud team a couple years ago, only lost by 1 score. They took them to the wire in 2018 against that Urban Meyer team that eventually won the Rose Bowl, went 13-1, but struggled against a lot of mediocre teams. But when you talked about Nebraska possibly having a shiny, impressive record coming into Columbus, what that reminded me of was 2016. They were 7-0. They hit Columbus and 62-3.
I was at that game. Yeah, it was over. That was one of those fights that was over before it was started, right?
Got Bill Bender here from Sporting News. Bill, one more thing we'll hit you before you need to take off, but the Michigan verdict is expected to come down any day. Boy, we could go on for hours, but we'll just get your quick thoughts about what that could look like and what it means.
Yeah, conspiracy theory, is that's going to come out right about the time that Connor Stallion's Netflix special comes out. They'll probably coincide, so I'm going to have to write 2 stories that day instead of 1. I think they'll get punished. I think it'll be financial. I don't know. That one thing I do need to research a little bit closer, because it came up last year, is if they get a postseason ban, the college football playoff doesn't have to necessarily follow what the NCAA does. That was made clear last year. It was like, okay, we could leave you out of the Big Ten championship. Well, the playoff could still take them. So is a postseason ban even worth it? I don't think they'll vacate wins. And that's the one that both sides, and when I say both sides, I'm talking Ohio State, Michigan fans. When I see them bicker on Twitter, Ohio State fans want those wins vacated. They want it so they can say they cheated. These last 3 years didn't count. There's big asterisks next to that. I don't think that's going to happen. And I think Michigan fans, they may take a year bowl ban instead of losing that title. And that seems like regressive thinking, But that's what we do in college football. We clutch on to what we've won. Louisville lost that national championship in basketball, and I think it still hurts. It really does. But if they still had that to cling on to, it would help them get through some really rough seasons in basketball. So I'm interested. I don't know about you, about Connor Stallions and what this documentary does. I don't know if you watched Manziel and Swamp Kings last year, but those were very one-sided. And I have a feeling this special is going to be very one-sided, and it's just going to make people angry about an issue that I think Michigan's trying to put in the rearview mirror, but it's not necessarily going to go away.
It's not a conversation right now, and we know you need to go, but sometime in the offseason, would love to take your perspective on the Ohio State situation of 2010, 11, 12 with the tattoo gate and all that, and how that transpired, because I have serious issues with that. Not necessarily that they were found to have broken rules. They did, but I have some issues with the penalties there. Bill, we know you need to run. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Well, I hope to make this a habit during the season. This is so much fun talking to you. We cover a lot of ground in a hurry, and until next time, we'll do it again.
Absolutely, Bill. You're welcome anytime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.